great. Well, welcome. So I kind of wanted to start off by asking you about how back in March, we know that Stack Overflow announced that all employees will begin working remotely. So I know that the company normally has up to a third of its employees working remotely. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Amrita, for inviting me and also for this conversation. But yeah, the answer to that question is that it's actually about 40% pre-COVID was actually remote. And now, of course, we're 100% remote, but I'm happy to go in any direction that you want on that.
Got it. So now 6 months out, how would you say the experiment has played out so far?
Yeah, it's actually a great word. I think, experiment, or as I really think it's truly a global human experiment almost, where we've all sort of had to adapt very, very quickly. What's been great, to see is that just, in general, I think it's reinforced, in my opinion, just our belief that human beings, and of course in our own company, stackers, as we like to call them, have been very, very resilient through this period since early February and March when we did go remote. And I would say, we had a little bit of an advantage as a company because, like you pointed out, 40% of our company was remote. Previously, 80% of our product and engineering teams were remote. 60% of our marketing team was remote. So a significant portion of our company was already operating with a remote first type attitude and just kind of DNA. And so a lot of what the company has done over the past decade, we've been a big proponent of this type of work, and we've been really leading the way in terms of things like asynchronous work versus synchronous work. I'm happy to talk more about that, and all of those things, and those just the norms and the DNA, and really making sure that people feel really included as part of, irrespective of where they're based, within the office or not, has been very much part of the company's DNA for many, many years. So luckily for us, I would say for the most part, of course, it's an extremely trying time. And people have to, really prioritize their health, and both their physical and mental health. But in general, I would say we've been lucky in that we've had some practice on this topic. And so we've sort of been benefited by that.
Got it. Would you be able to kind of explore the differences between asynchronous and synchronous work, as you mentioned?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, a lot of what we discovered in the early years at Stack Overflow, even before I joined the company in October of 2019 as a CEO. But my predecessor, Joel Spolsky, who's still the chairman of the company, and Jeff Atwood, the other founder, all of them had sort of created this foundation on the public platform that we had, that is Stack Overflow, which attracts, something like over 100 million monthly visitors. And that public platform where you have 50 million questions and answers to all your technical questions and software development questions, that is effectively an asynchronous way in which people collaborate from an external perspective from all around the world. And that scale is obviously massive with 100 million monthly visitors. And so taking that same fundamental paradigm and extending that to private communities, just like we build public communities on Stack Overflow with our Teams product, which has now become the leading asynchronous product that's out there, has really been able to, has given us kind of a really a great way to impact people's lives on a day-to-day basis, especially during this time that we're in. And so the big difference, of course, is synchronous is all about, real-time communications like this conversation, or, on any Zoom meeting or a Google Meet, or even a Slack exchange or Microsoft Teams exchange. And all of that, I think, is very obviously, it's critical. People love, we're consumers of all those tools, and we love it in the context of engaging in a real-time basis. But also there's a real need to actually get work done, especially if you're a technologist. I think, there's everybody who's been a developer knows that, including myself, that, you need not to be interrupted and not to context switch when you're actually focused on your work and you're really driving towards, trying to solve a problem. And so the boon of asynchronous work is that it allows you to get work done, but it allows you to almost to schedule it and to batch it in a way that allows you, just like you batch your emails at night or early in the morning, just so that you are structured in the way you do work and you're not constantly being distracted. And so that's a very, very important point, especially for technical folks.
Got it. So companies that first begin working remotely, I know, face a lot of common challenges. So remote employees often talk about feeling disconnected or isolated from the company at large. It may be hard for some managers to hold employees accountable, or productivity may take a dip. What are some tips and tricks to tackle these problems?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, actually. It comes down to ultimately, from my perspective, sort of a fairly significant cultural shift around the world. And I think this is going to really accelerate that motion. So in traditional companies, I've been at other companies before this one. And I would say in traditional companies, especially, maybe a couple of decades ago, the traditional way of managing people or leading people is very much sort of a tops down type motion. That's very much, it's no longer sort of the norm. They're very, very rapidly, you are really thinking about concepts like servant leadership. You're thinking about how do you empower your people to deliver outstanding results, which is literally, by the way, one of our core values at Stack Overflow. And the ability for us to do that requires a tremendous amount of trust in our people to say, listen, here's where we're going. Here's our mission. Here's our product vision. Here are our strategic priorities and foundations for next year. How do we operate against them and ensure that we actually achieve our goals, but really being able to, empower them with what they need to be able to succeed. So I really believe that that's the way of the future. There's got to be some level of direction setting. So it's not just sort of, doing things in a very random way, but there's got to be, I would say, being respectful of people's time. The cadences need to be somewhat sustainable, and that's all a work in progress, to be honest. Because even for us, which is that to drive a company or to move in a certain direction with a certain outcome, you're going to need some level of a sort of an operating rhythm. And that's a constant question for us to say, how do we make sure we increase the frequency of certain things or decrease the frequency of certain things? How do we minimize the number, the amount of time in meetings from 1 hour to 45 minutes? So all these things are being adjusted on a real time basis. But net, what it comes down to is really, I think, empowering employees to be successful, and really that requires you to, I think, beyond any other time in history, trust the people that you hire in a way to deliver outstanding results. And that's really, I think, a foundational shift.
So one aspect of communication that remote work perhaps made more possible is communicating with global offices. As you said, we're very much, we've kind of evolved from a 9-to-5 single office to perhaps working with the Hong Kong office or the London office or offices all over the world. How has remote work kind of made that easier? And could you kind of talk about maybe Stack Overflow's individual experience with that?
Yeah, so I think this is also a great question. Especially for us, our community of over 100 million monthly visitors, our community is spread literally all around the world, right? So our biggest population of users is in India. Secondly, it's in the US. We have people obviously in Europe, in Asia, Australia, you name it. And our company is also global to reflect that for the most part. In the first 12 years of our existence, the company since 2008 opened up offices not only in the US, we opened up in London. We have an office in Munich. We have stackers, or employees as we like to call them, in Russia, in Australia. We have them everywhere, right? So literally our organization has been distributed literally globally for over a decade. And most recently, we raised a fairly large round of financing in our Series E round over the summer with some great investors who are also global. GIC, which is the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore, Silver Lake Waterman, which is obviously a global venture capital private equity firm that is operates on a global scale. So we have been we've attracted global community users. We have got global customers in our paid products, and we've got investors that are global in scale. So we've sort of embodied that in sort of how we operate. And I think the opportunity there is, of course, when we think about market opportunities to expand into, and we're adding now headcount all around the world as a result of our fundraising to grow our business and serve our community. And also to be able to really be able to get phenomenal talent irrespective of where they're based. Right, and so we're not limited anymore to to talent that's very specific to our physical locations and our offices and so on. So it's really unlocked, I believe, and a lot of opportunity and potential for us.
So you mentioned the entire concept of employee trust. So I think we can all agree that establishing trust with your coworkers and employees, it obviously takes time. remote work also obviously requires a strong level of trust between employees and employers in order to succeed. And there's also this notion of swift trust, or the idea that trust can also occur between non-traditional kind of temporary teams, or a non-traditional kind of context as you see in remote work. So
yeah.
I guess, what's your advice for ensuring that trust happens in a remote context when you're no longer in the same physical space and might not have the luxury of time?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question, and one I would say is in general it's a work in progress, right? There's a lot to kind of experiment here with, and for us particularly, I would say ultimately being aligned around a common set of priorities and goals, and really ultimately inspiring people to build really great things, as somebody that used to work with me used to say. And that as long as they're inspired by what they're working on, and there's actually a very clear connection that they're actually going to do that. Now it's number one, being inspirational and being, having people on the team that are actually 100% bought into the mission, the vision of where we're headed, plus also what we're trying to achieve literally in the next 12 months. And being just relentless about getting there without really any, and no ambiguity about, where we're headed, by really repeating. And I consider a lot of my job, making sure that I over communicate kind of the goals of the organization. And every week I send an email to the company on Fridays, recapping what I did over the past week, and what I think the company should be aware of, good and bad, about how the week kind of went on. So I think trust, it requires a level of communication and transparency in your interactions with your stackers or your employees more broadly. And really being approachable, I think, to answer questions, especially in the remote world where, you shouldn't be limited by, the one meeting where you actually are in a town hall or whatnot. And people and employees reach out to me all the time on a one-on-one basis. And just having, I think, that approachability, I think is a really, really key element, in addition to over communicating what you're trying to accomplish. And both those things, I think, as long as you've got the right people, you hire really well, and you're testing for the right type of qualities, both attitude and aptitude, on both dimensions, you're really maximizing your chances for people that are going to deliver on what, you're trying to accomplish. Now, you can never get 100% right. I've made, bad hires in my past, and some of that you have to just learn from those mistakes and basically move on.
Got it. So that's interesting. So you bring up constant communication, and you hear that often as far as best practices with remote work. Keep your bosses informed, keep your coworkers informed of what you're doing. How do you kind of address the flip side of that? We're looking at perhaps a situation where people are dealing with Zoom fatigue, or too many video conferences, and feeling too tied to Slack or their email. How do you kind of counter that?
Yeah, it's also really, it's nuanced, right? The question that you're asking, which is that there's a balance between over communicating to make sure everybody's aligned, especially in a remote world. And then there is this element of how are you bombarding people with too much information all the time, because everybody is being bombarded, whether that's, work related or non-work related. There's so much information coming your way on a daily basis. So what we've discovered is really what I was mentioning earlier around the difference between synchronous and asynchronous work, right? So for us, we have a very specific operating cadence in our company that involves, weekly business reviews on certain topics, monthly business reviews on other topics, quarterly all hands for the entire company, weekly emails from me on Fridays, weekly emails from my product and technology leader on a weekly basis. So there's a very specific, and some of them are synchronous things and some of them are asynchronous things. Right. And so I think really finding the balance and what's appropriate for your organization. You just have to set every CEO or every leader has to figure out what's appropriate for their organization, depending on what they're trying to do, or how big of it's a transformation, or whether it's a high growth spurt, or, whatever else they're trying to navigate, I think determines how you best do that. Because employees, you'd be surprised how much and what they want to hear at various different times of, at different points in the year, right? Especially during this COVID situation, it's been fascinating to see when people wanted more communication and when people wanted less communication. There was a period early on where people wanted to hear a lot from us, and so we really kind of over communicated quite a bit. But then when the plan was set in a way that we understood what's happening and here's what the plan is, and there was clarity on that, especially with the other cadences that we had going on, it was not necessary to be as frequent as some of those earlier kind of months. So I think it requires a level of dynamism and just flexibility to figure out how to best make sure your employees get the information, but are also not fatigued with a lot of synchronous work. And so we do, with asynchronous, and we, by the way, we like to say we drink our own champagne, so to speak, by using our own products. And in that case, we use our Stack Overflow for Teams product internally. And I publish who, internally contributes to those, to that platform. Internally, I share those statistics on a weekly basis, because we're encouraging people to use our own products to enable the entire organization to work more asynchronously, so that people are being, it's more palatable for folks in the long run.
Got it. So looking towards the future, there's been a lot of discussion of whether some companies might go towards a permanent shift to remote work, and whether this kind of experiment will change American office life or even global office life forever.
Yeah.
So what's your take on what the future will hold as far as remote work, hybrid work, or any type of kind of work mode shift?
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating question. I mean, I'm very, very convinced that there is no returning back to what it used to be. I'm, almost 100% sure that whenever the pandemic is done, we're done with it, and we have, everybody's got the vaccine, and we're all in good shape. I am, very confident that that many companies will not return to offices permanently. I think what is likely to be, from a histogram or a mean perspective, it's likely that most companies will adopt sort of a hybrid approach, where they have some number of days in the office and some number of days at home. And only because, even if everything was from a health-wise perspective and there wasn't any risk to people, I think despite the Zoom fatigue, despite the challenges of balancing, personal and professional life at home, I think there's net, again, there is a very significant benefit that people have, kind of reported, especially in the technical workforce, of saying, I don't have my 2-hour commute from the suburbs into the city. I don't have to waste that amount of time, 4 hours of my time doing that. People take 15-minute walks outside, as an example, right? Or you can still, we've done a lot of things to make sure that people still feel connected and so on. But despite the pros and cons, I do believe on a net basis, especially technical employees, folks that are, developers or technologists more broadly, really appreciate the work from home culture. So I do believe that's going to become more and more the norm. I think, as you've seen many announcements from companies, whether that's Google or Microsoft, et cetera, all announcing very similar kind of policies. We, by the way, have announced that we're not coming back into the offices until at least middle of next year, 2021. And so we've still got a decision to make depending on what happens in the pandemic. So yeah, but maybe one last point I mentioned here, Amrita, is that more broadly, we've done a lot with our people team and our senior leadership team to enable our stackers to feel really taken care of during this time. So we've really allowed people to opened up a new relocation policy. People are able to go work from wherever they want in the country or even the world in some cases. We've launched something called the caregiver policy for people that are taking care of kids at home, and to give them the ability to balance work. We've given them a remote work stipend. We've given them an internet stipend. We've given them the ability to reimburse their fitness, professional development, and obviously internally there's a whole bunch of cultural things that we do to enable people to form connections with people that they may not have met, or new people that have joined the team, and all sorts of things like bev bashes and stack roulette, as we like to call it, where people are randomly assigned to meet in groups of 3. And weekly cooking classes and all sorts of things that we do to make sure that people feel connected. So I just at least want to add that we've been fairly deliberate as a team to make sure that people feel supported during this new way of working.
Great. Well, Prashanth, that's about it for my questions. Thank you so much for your thoughtful responses. There's definitely a lot to think about as we move towards the future of remote work. So thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. Thank you for your questions. I enjoyed talking to you today.
Thanks. Thanks.